Welcome to the Raising Values podcast, where the traditional family talks. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can support the Raising Values podcast through Patreon. Phil and Gillian are behind the mic, and we hope you enjoy the show. I can help.
Great. Welcome back to Raising Values. My co-host and I we're having a side conversation that tripped into the show, but
Okay.
So I thought we'd sit down and talk about something that Gillian and I have talked about on the other podcast, Matter of Facts, once or twice. But like I point out to her, like we've never discussed it on Raising Values, and we've never discussed it, I guess, with the tone that this show has, because the tone this show has tends to be pretty different from Matter of Facts.
Yeah, we were trying to think of ways on our walk last night of changing it up, because you say we've talked about this once or twice on Matter of Facts, but it's probably been more like 7 or 8, maybe not that many. But yeah, we have talked about prepping as a family and things like that on your podcast. But this one, I'm hoping to have a little bit different tone to it and kind of delve into a little bit more specifically of what it means to be a prepping family or a survivalist family.
And I think part of the difference also is like prepping, survivalism, emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness, anything in that vein. That's really a central focal point of Matter of Facts. Like that was the impetus for that podcast being started 7 years ago, was to try to shock people back into remembering all of this old school. We didn't even call it prepper knowledge. It was just, we live in hurricane hell, and you need peanut butter and bread just in case your power goes out for a week. You know, it was common sense. But I began to realize that a lot of my fellow man, roughly our age, and we're both hovering around that 40 mark, so like we're very early millennials, but a lot of our generation just, they missed the off ramp. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and it's the 11th, so happy birthday to my sister. But it's also 11 days into hurricane season, and if you've listened to the Matter of Fact show at all, you know our story of Hurricane Ida and all the mess that came from that with us, and how we had to fall back on our preps and all the things that we had put together for hurricanes and natural disasters and things like that. But, you know, we prep for other reasons as well. And it was an eye-opening experience. I don't think we have to go too far into Hurricane Ida and what happened, because I think we've beat that dead horse so much. And it's not something that I particularly like to talk about all the time because it was a traumatic experience.
It was a little trauma.
But yeah, so that's what we do. But we've been doing it well before, like a long time before Hurricane Ida hit.
Yeah. So I guess let's dip our toe into, you know, I refer to whatever you call this, and everybody has their own term. Some people shy away from the prepper term because it makes people think doomsday prepper and crazy people. Well, I feel like there's a stigma. Some of it is almost justified because of the way that survivalists have been portrayed by the media mostly.
You're so crazy for wanting to be ready for an emergency. You are so crazy for wanting to make sure that your family is prepared for something.
But here's the problem. You have those people.
Prepper.
You have those people that think, well, none of that's never going to happen, so that's not necessary. You have those people, but then you also have the people who I almost like forgive them for having that opinion, because they've watched doomsday preppers and they've watched Hollywood's portrayal of what a prepper really is, and they portray the craziest of the crazies, like people that do things that they call prepping. Even I wouldn't indulge in, because I think that makes no freaking sense. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's a situation where like there's a population out there that views preppers as nut jobs, that I think to myself, well, you know, we're going to play FAFO with life, and one of us is going to find out. And then there's the people that I forgive for having that opinion, because I understand where their opinion came from, and even I would agree that that's a little ish.
I don't know. I guess maybe I'm a little more hard with giving grace in that area. Gosh, how contradicting was that statement? To me, it's like, if, like, for instance, I was caught up in this downward spiral. I guess not a downward spiral, but this. I came across this like reel on Facebook, and it was talking about women's health and something regarding women's health, and I kind of went down that rabbit hole, and there was a comment in one of the videos about something in particular, and I was like, I've never heard of that. I mean, I've been a woman for almost 40 years, and I've never heard of this thing that this woman was talking about. And so I did the research, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that could happen, because it doesn't happen to me. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of, reflect that back onto people who are so naive and ignorant when it comes to preppers or survivalists, and they just go off of whatever Hollywood has portrayed those people as. It's like anytime anything is done on the South, they pick the ones that are missing all their teeth and can't speak a lick of English or whatever.
In the moo-moo and the house slippers.
Right. Yeah. Or, whatever, Uncle Joe Bob from the back shack has come out, and now he's going to give the report of whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that's not an honest portrayal of what Southern people are, or what, who we are. And it's the same for a prepper family or a prepper or survivalist. Do people live in bunkers? Yeah. There's a whole community of people that live in old fallout shelters,
old nuclear silos.
Yeah.
They're being converted into basically like underground apartments. Yeah.
Do I envy them? Only because they have an amazing scene at night of the night sky.
Yeah.
But
and then you have the other group that thinks preppers are crazy that say,
"Oh man, yeah.
Oh, the government will come save us."
Yeah. What came out during COVID? It wasn't during COVID. Oh gosh, I forgot which president said this. I always do this. The scariest phrase is someone saying the government is.
I think that was
I'm
Reagan.
from the government and I'm here to help. Reagan.
I think that was Reagan.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help. God, that is scary. But that is the culture of the United States. Citizens in the United States now is, well, the government's going to take care of me. The government's going to help fix my house, and the government's going to give me food. And it's like, we were listening. We still had a tree on our house. We were listening to the radio in the backyard, and we're trying to get updates, and we're just kind of trying to sink in what the hell just happened.
The formal term is intelligence gathering.
Well, yeah, but there is this man who called into the radio station. He's like, "I'm hungry. When is the grocery store going to open again?" Dude, this storm did more damage than Katrina did as far as electricity goes. So Ida, in a lot of cases, did a lot more damage than Hurricane Katrina did. But it was that realism. I mean, I can remember us looking at each other going, "Did we just hear that right?" Like,
yes.
We're not even 6 hours from the storm being cleared from the Gulf of Mexico, and he's wondering, when is the grocery store going to open again?
Yeah.
Like, poor soul, I feel bad for you. Find a soup kitchen maybe, but honey, nothing's going to be open for another week, at least another week.
So to tie this into like what I meant when I put up the lifestyle, like there are two competing schools of thought here, and the one that I don't subscribe to is that through government and my tax dollars. Yes, I see Andrew. I'm not dignifying him with a response. For anybody that's in the comments, that troll is my co-host for Matter of Fact, who I love dearly, but he can't help himself sometimes. But there's this school of thought that thinks that through my tax dollars and the state, I can abdicate my responsibility to care for myself and my family. So they believe that, and if you told it to them like this, they probably wouldn't put two and two together, but actions speak louder than words. So like, through their actions, they make it very clear that they believe that the police are there to secure their well-being, and FEMA is there to help them when a tree lands on their house, and the government is there to tell them right from wrong. And that is one school of thought. And then you have my school of thought, Gillian's school of thought, where like no one is coming to save us. No one is coming to provide for us. No one is responsible for my family's well-being but me and you. And that's why we do a lot of the things we do. We profess a lot of the things we do because, the day after Ida, I was talking to somebody about this literally just yesterday. The gentleman at the gun range who was really interested in the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So, I explained to him, the day after Hurricane Ida, we had a tree sitting on the house, another tree sitting on the house, one in the front yard. Power was out. It was going to be for, 7 or 8 days? Not that we realized.
Oh, we were told a month at least.
But I mean, when it finally got restored, I think it was 7 or 8 days.
It was over a week.
So it was just over a week. We had no water pressure the next morning.
Right.
So it was a bad situation. But we weren't worried about where we're going to get our next meal. We weren't worried about where do we get drinking water. We weren't worried about, there were so many things we were worried about, but there were so many things we weren't worried about because we'd already had a plan in place for if that system shuts down, we move to this one. If this one shuts down, we move to this one. And we had attempted to insulate ourselves from harm by planning ahead and preparing in advance. And I guess that is the two competing schools of thought. I refer to prepping, survivalism, whatever you will, as a lifestyle. It's not a hobby. It's not an activity. And it's not I guess you could argue it's a community, but to me it's a lifestyle. Because once you start to view your family's safety and security and comfort and well-being in this light of, I am responsible for it, I must do what I have to do to make sure it's insured, it creeps into all those other aspects of your life that you don't expect it to. It gets, yes, our neighbor is mowing the lawn, if y'all can hear that.
Ran over a tree, it sounds like.
Probably a pine cone. But it becomes one of those things where it will creep into the most basic places of your life that you don't expect it to, way beyond, I just need a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter to get through a hurricane, or I need another case of MREs and another case of ammo just in case. It creeps in all those little spots in your life because it changes the way you think.
Yeah. And it's gotten to the point with us, because we've been doing it for so long, that I don't know about you, but I hardly think about it anymore. Everything is such second nature to us. I know that when we go grocery shopping, we're going to go down the canned good aisle and we're going to pick up 1 can, 3 cans of whatever we've used that week or whatever, but we're also going to stockpile for some other things that we have, I know we have probably a good, couple of few weeks worth of food.
Yeah, and it's also that starts before we even leave the house, because most people shop by going to the grocery store and just pulling random stuff off, putting it in the cart, and then they get home and see if they're missing anything. No forethought at all. Some people
do. I wouldn't say most.
Most people would go through their refrigerator and probably their pantry and say, I'm missing these things, I need to get these things. And then above and beyond that layer, we have a chest freezer and a can rack and a second pantry. So we have 3 other things we have to check and say, I'm down to 10 or 15 pounds of ground beef. I really, if they're, because the grocery store we go to are down there, they'll run a sale where they'll have a bulk pack of beef discounted at a reasonable price. And it's never a function of, I don't have room, but sometimes it's a function of, they don't have the bulk pack down there for the good price, so I don't need it. I've got 15 pounds of ground beef. But if they have one, I'm just going to pick one up, throw it in the cart, bring it home, package it up, and that's 3 to 5 pounds more ground beef to add to the stockpile. And it's going into a chest freezer, so it's not like it's going to spoil anytime soon. I mean, we could eat beef tacos often enough that's not going to happen. But we have this whole other layer to our food preps that the average person doesn't, that we also go and look through to make sure it's stocked and we're adding to it. And then, because I just got through doing this late last year, we have a long-term food storage, which is dry goods. It's rice, it's beans, it's baking supplies, flour, cornmeal, sugar, baking powder, all that kind of stuff. Anything I can imagine myself needing to bake, including the powdered milk. Not that I really want to bake with it, but
that's like a last resort.
True, but that's what the long-term food storage is there for. It's a last resort. So that's the long-term food storage is not a pop it open every month and look at it, dig into it, because we're not taking out of it very often.
Oh no, we're not at all.
So I guess I'm saying is like the critical difference between us in a prepping lifestyle and the average person is the average person is probably replenishing the stuff they use, but we have additional layers to that system built so that if the grocery store goes, toes to the moon tomorrow and there's no food on the shelves, that's going to really be an issue for probably 80% of the population within 3 to 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
It will become an issue for us in, I don't know, babe, 90 days, 120 days? God only knows. Like at this point, we started off down this lifestyle of, and this is what I recommend to new preppers is I'm like, you prep for 3 days, and then you prep for a week, and then you push it out to 2 weeks, and then a month, and you have to cover all your bases from food to water to everything, all to a certain time period, and then you push the time period further and further out. But after 7 years of doing this, I don't rightfully know anymore how long all of our stuff would last.
My uncle asked us that last weekend. He, wanted to know what did we have and, how long would it last and things like that. And I honestly couldn't answer him. And I'm going through everything, like all the little stations, I guess you could say, that we have. And I'm like, I don't know, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I don't know. We just, because it's such an everyday thing for us. Like, and it's not like we don't take account of everything in there. It's just sometimes I just don't know. Hang on, I didn't see what this said. Our kids are so used to it now. They know some goes in the regular pantry and some goes in the backup pantry.
Well, just like we did yesterday.
Yep, scores a crazy deal. Backup pantry is super full. Yes, Mom. Love it. That's us too. Backup pantry is in the garage, and then after that is the long-term food storage, and then we have a water wall. We also, that's the other thing I wanted to, a lot of times we talk about our food. Everybody talks about, well, we'll stock up on your food, and then they say things like beans and rice and all that stuff. And when we get further down into our banners and the different areas we're going to talk about today, we'll go into more of how we prep and things like that. But don't forget to, prep for the kids. Don't forget to prep the bullet. Somebody on here, I can't, it's way up in the comments.
Joe, beans, bullets, and Band-Aids.
Beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. So yeah, your first aid kit needs to have, quite a few things in there that you really wouldn't think of. And it's Band-Aids, of course, but you have to start thinking of a little bit scarier what ifs. I know that as we were going through pulling getting the trees cut down off getting the trees pulled down off the house and everything, there were injuries. I mean, they weren't horrible injuries, but there were cuts and bruises and pokes and stings and all sorts of things happening. And I was really grateful for first off, I was really grateful for the safety gear that you had on with the chainsaw, and, our brother-in-law had on with the chainsaw and all that stuff. But otherwise, I was out there in shorts and tennis shoes pulling I don't even know how big that tree was, 100-year-old oak tree off of the house. And I don't know if you know this, but wasps and other things like to live in oak trees. So as we're pulling things off, everybody's getting stung or bit or whatever. So first aid kits are super important to have. Trying to think, my gosh, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's so hard now to talk about and think about all the things that we have. Batteries for flashlight. I guess we could really go into that a little bit in detail later, but
I do want to double back on Joe's question of how do we store water. So, to preface this, specific to water, the problem we have around here is, like, there are a lot of people out there that would suggest what you need to do is identify your nearest fresh water source so that you have something that constantly replenishes. The problem we have down here in South Louisiana is that we have so much saltwater intrusion so far north of the Gulf. Even supposedly freshwater sources can become brackish depending on the current, the time of year. So I very quickly discounted the idea of finding a freshwater water source, and instead I have gone straight into water storage. So we Because again, I started a lot of this when we weren't making the money we are now, and we were, I don't want to say in poverty, but like money was very tight. So I had to find very creative ways to prep on a budget. So I started salvaging 2-liter pop bottles, soda bottles, Coke bottles, whatever you call them. I started salvaging those, and I'd wash them out with a little bit of Dawn and scalding hot water. I'd let them dry out. I'd fill them with tap water, because tap water from the city system has just enough chlorine to keep it from turning into mold hell over time. And then I started stacking them in a rack I have in the garage, and I literally kept on stacking and stacking and stacking. And this rack is 6 feet tall and about, I don't know, 3 feet across, and it's filled to the brim with 2-liter bottles laid over on their side. So I think at one point I had done the math and figured that should be about 28 days worth of water at max sustainment. So like no making coffee, no, like that is max sustainment 28 days. But the real intention of that water wall is if the water pressure goes to 0 or if we're under boil water advisory, which happens, we immediately shift to that. We keep cooking, we keep making coffee, nothing changes. And what that does is it gives me at least 2 weeks. And if the boil water advisory extends further than 2 weeks, I have all the stuff I need here to make a water filter, like a gravity-based water filter. So if push comes to shove, we have the ability to boil the water and then turn around and run it through the gravity. And like it will be more effort than just turning on the tap. But what that water wall is there to give me is buffer, so that I don't immediately have a problem. I'll have a problem eventually. Like if the water pressure goes to 0 and stays that way for months, obviously we're all going to have a problem. But I have time to work that problem out without it being an immediate emergency, which I guess is kind of that's what the lifestyle is. It's about this thing happened. It's an immediate emergency if you don't have a fallback plan. If you don't, it's still inconveniencing, it's uncomfortable, but it's not an emergency necessarily, because we move from plan A to plan B to plan C to plan D, and it's not until we run out of plans that we're in trouble.
Yeah.
The average person just gets in trouble much, much faster.
We also have water collection bins around the house too. We're about to set up 2 more on the other side of the house. But, it's not potable water.
It could be made potable.
But that's, I was going there. It could be made potable. It's just a rain catch on one side of the house, and now we're going to put a 2 more on the other side of the house. So we'll have that as a source as well. And
I've also given thought to just frankly hammering a sock pipe down into the ground in the backyard and then putting a manual pump on the top of it. Because the water table here is only, I looked it up, in this area according to U.S. Geological Survey or Service, I think the water table is at max 16 feet below the surface.
No, but that's not going to work for someone who lives in an apartment in the city. They can't do those kinds of things, but they can put together at least a week's worth of water,
Pro tip, if there's a hurricane coming or you're expecting an interruption in your water service, the first thing you better do is fill up your daggone bathtub.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the simplest, stupidest advice, and there's somebody out there saying, well, of course you do that, but you would not believe how many people don't do that. And I don't remember off the top of my head how many gallons of water the average bathtub holds, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. Again, this is why I started Matter of Facts all those years ago, was because like some of this common sense disaster preparedness knowledge just seemed to have been lost on my generation. And I was like, my parents knew this and they taught me this. I don't know who the hell didn't tell the rest of y'all. But, So, I say this slightly tongue-in-cheek because you've had this experience. Because I was the first one that came into this lifestyle, and then you were a little reticent, and I had to encourage you into it. But there are a lot of people out there that, like, one spouse is the crazy prepper in the bunch, and the other spouse can range from reticent but like willing to go along, all the way to completely opposed.
Yeah. For our audio listeners, the banner says "Married to a Crazy Prepper."
I'm the worst for explaining the banner. Sorry, y'all.
So we've talked about this on Matter of Facts, our story of how we got into prepping and how you got us all into prepping. And yes, there were times at the very beginning where I just thought that you were a little nuts. You had kind of jumped off the deep end there, and had a conversation with my father-in-law about, I don't know, Dad, this is getting a little weird.
I would love to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation.
He reassured me that, he's just taking care of the family, and that you don't normally do things that are just so off the wall, that this isn't just like, if Phil is putting time into this, then it's something important, and all that stuff. But yeah, I started off this lifestyle going, what in the hell are you doing?
And to be fair, it wasn't like the extra cans of beans or the first aid kit that sent you over the edge. I think it was when the body armor showed up on the front door, and that was when all your alarm bells went off all at the same time.
Okay, you say that all the time, but you have to think, I know I'm married to a veteran. I know that you were like, well, at least, well, you still are, but when we first got married, when we first started dating, you were very much a like gung-ho like male, like, I just got home from Iraq and da-da-da. And so it wasn't like super crazy that body armor showed up on the front doorstep. And I don't even know, I can't even like pinpoint a time when I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do this, whatever. I can just remember thinking, what is he doing? Like, what are we stockpiling in here for? And I don't think it took a lot of convincing to get me to kind of step over into your world. And what we say is that I had complete trust in you, and that's another banner that we're going to talk about, was that I did question your mental status at some point, not to the point where I thought, well, he really needs to be seeing someone, but I fell back on the, well, okay, if this is something that Phil is really dedicated to, and he thinks this is going to make a difference, and he's really concerned about this, then I trust him, and I think, okay, let's get on board. And and so I wanted to learn why you had started to do this, and your reason why it totally made sense. And I just accepted it because my husband thought it was important. And there's some things, I think, in a marriage or in a relationship where I think one person can really fall off the deep end. I mean, if you came home one day and was like, babe, I think we're going to start worshiping Satan, and I feel really adamant about this, and I'm just so passionate about worshiping Satan, then yeah, I would be like, you need help. And but body armor and extra food and water supply and all that stuff, I'm like, yeah, what can it hurt to do this?
Well, and to a slightly less extreme point, like if I came home one day and said, what, babe, the world is going to collapse, and I think it's just time to clear out the 401k and the savings account. Like, we just buy all the MREs we can afford and get ready for the zombie apocalypse. Like, I trust that you would pump the brakes a little bit and be like, hold on a second. Before we pull the pin on the hand grenade that would have been our retirement savings, let's have a discussion.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess to me, it's, like that I'm also one of those people where I kind of butt heads with some of the other survivalists in the community when that is their opinion, is that, well, by the time I reach retirement age, like, the world will collapse, Social Security will be gone, my 401k will be useless, so there's no point in preparing for my old age. And then I'm the one that's like, but what happens if the world doesn't collapse? Like, I really don't want to work till noon on the day I die. Right. I need retirement savings, I need these things, and that's a prep to me, like everything else is. I'm just going to balance that against getting ready for what might happen.
Right. That is what the example that I use when I have friends, and often it's going to
I'm just going to move to the next banner because we're there.
Oh,
Please
okay.
continue. Being
a survivalist every day. But, I used to be kind of shy about saying, we're preppers. And that was like a long time before I started using the term survivalist and things like that, which can also make people go, what? But most of my conversations are with women. They're not really with men when I have these conversations. And so the example that I always give them is, do you have money in your savings account? Hopefully the answer is always, yeah, I have money in my savings account. Why? Why do you have money in your savings account? Well, just in case I need it. Okay, well then you're a prepper. Like, you are going down that road of being a prepper and thinking about the what ifs and the just in cases. And then you can kind of see that light bulb turn on, and it's like, but so then why is it so creepy or freaky to you that I have food in the garage, or I have water in the garage, or that we have buckets of long-term storage in the garage? Like, why does that freak you out so much when I say that your friend is a prepper? And it does kind of sway their opinion at that point, because they're like, yeah, I can kind of go along with that, or whatever. That kind of represents me a little bit, but I don't know. I've now gotten to the point where in my life, for a lot of things, almost everything, I don't care what people think. And so
it's an invigorating experience.
It's so nice to not care what people think about me, but I can say and go to sleep at night, lay my head on that pillow and think, if crap hits the fan, then yeah, we're good, at least for a little while. And I feel very sorry. I think of the man, we saw him yesterday on our walk, that he's a veteran as well.
Navy veteran, yeah.
And when Ida hit, we brought, I think, 2 cases of water to him, and he cried. He cried, and he didn't have any damage to his home. He was just without power. Obviously, he had stayed the night, so he heard what I call the demons that were wisping around outside. It really was a scary night. But he cried because he said, now we can cook breakfast, or now we can make food. And I'm just thinking, how did you not have water? Basic water. And what happened in our subdivision was a tree fell on the water tank that provides the water.
It's like 20 yards that direction.
And so our subdivision did not have water pressure for at least the first day after Ida. So these poor, I wouldn't say elderly, but they're older. They're probably in their 60s and 70s. They didn't have the supplies just to make basic like grits, or to boil anything, to drink water. They didn't have water to drink. And so when we brought him these pallets of water, or not pallets, but these flats of water, he just cried. And I don't know. I guess when you came home and started this lifestyle, I thought, okay, maybe you're a little nuts. But then these different things happen. COVID happened. You can't go to the grocery store anymore because it's illegal to go to the grocery store. Natural disasters happen. And I just thank God so much that you did step into this lifestyle and get our family into such a position that we could withstand those things happening in the outside world, outside of this house.
And to get us to this point, like the banner says, being a survivalist every day, and I feel like that is the thing that most people outside of this lifestyle miss, and that is the thing that most people within this lifestyle probably do without thinking about it. Because like you said earlier in the show, like, there's so many aspects to this that we do without thinking about it. It's just second nature to us. Like the way we grocery shop is predicated upon this layered approach to our food pantry and having to replenish each part of that depending on usage. But it goes into like when we go out to the restaurant. We've said many times, like, I will have whichever seat is facing the door.
Yeah.
And I hope, because I've asked you to do this, I'm pretty sure you do, and we've encouraged Piper to do it. But the first thing I asked you to do, the first thing I always impressed upon you was, I'm like, you need to know where the other exit is. And pro tip, most restaurants that are built to like modern fire code have to have an exit in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. For obvious reasons. That's the most likely place a fire will start, and you may not be able to get past the fire to the front door, so the kitchen is supposed to have an exit. And I've always told Gillian, I'm like, as soon as we sit down, figure out where the kitchen is. Or figure out where the other exit is, because your danger is usually going to come from the front door. So that's why I want to face it. I want to have my eyes on it. and I want to know where it's coming from. But we've delineated our task in an event of an emergency situation. My job is to make sure you and Piper can get out. Your job is to get the two of you out. So you go for the exit, I go for the source of danger. But like that's something that we don't think about anymore. We don't talk about it. It's not a, hey, do you know where the exit is, or do you know where the kitchen is?
We do go over that with Piper every now and then. It's like a pop quiz.
But it's not something you and I have to discuss anymore
no.
because it's become second nature. Like, and we've literally like inadvertently trained Piper to where she actively avoids the chair that faces the door because she knows that's where Dad's supposed to sit. And I haven't even asked her like if she does that consciously, but she does it.
No, that's not true. Piper is going to sit wherever Dad's sitting, so Piper is always going to be facing the door because she likes to sit with you.
If there's two chairs that face the door, but what I'm saying
okay.
is, if not, like if it's a square table and those four chairs,
okay.
she's going to sit to the right or left of me, but she avoids that. If there's only one chair that faces the door, that chair just gets left open for me. That's I guess what I'm saying. Not like yesterday where we had a rectangular table and it was 2 plus 2, and yeah, she wanted to sit right next to me because she's Daddy's girl.
Yeah.
But like I said, I mean, it's that, and it's before we go on trips, our packing for vacations is a little different from most because I will grab like my emergency. If we're taking your Jeep, if we're taking my truck, most of that stuff lives in the truck already. Matter of fact, that's something I need to start getting towards is building out your own emergency roadside kit for your vehicle. Tire inflator. And
okay.
some of the stuff.
I have a lot of the same stuff that you have in the Jeep.
You have stuff that's built more for like shelter in place. Like you have water, you have emergency rations, mainstay rations in this case because they're foil packed, vacuum wrapped. They're shelf stable in a saltwater environment for something like 10 years. I mean, they're meant for boats. So they're perfectly fine inside of a vehicle. But like you have stuff that's basically built for shelter in place. My stuff is built for self-recovery because the idea always was if we take my truck and we're on a camping trip or whatever, we're going to be in the middle of nowhere. So I would like to have the ability to self-recover. And your stuff has more been built for sustainment because if like you're anywhere around here and you get into trouble, I'm coming to get you. So all you have to do is just stay put, sustain you and Piper until I get there. But anytime we take your Jeep on a vacation, I loot my truck and I grab the tire inflator and the plug kit and the big first aid kit and the blowout kit, and I pack up all this stuff in a drawstring bag and then throw it in the back of your Jeep. And now I have all of the same stuff I would use for self-recovery in my truck, I have it in your Jeep. And then we usually have to pack one bag that has firepower. Because we are not driving, we're not driving further than across town with nothing but a 9mm and one extra magazine. Like if we're going across state lines, we're carrying a firearm with several magazines, with extra ammunition, with extra medical equipment. Because it's one of those things where it's like, have I ever needed it? No. Do I ever want to need it and not have it? Also no.
Right.
And then, like when we pack up, we make sure we pack one pair of closed-toed shoes. We make sure that we pack extra socks, extra underwear, extra whatever. Like we make sure that we pack for more than we expect to need. And yeah, I guess most couples would do that and they don't think of it as, oh, I'm being ready for an emergency. But like there's all these little aspects to our day-to-day life that we do that's slightly different from most people, and I feel like it's because it's that survivalist mindset that has infiltrated our daily life. Like we constantly ask ourselves, what happens if? So I need a plan A and a plan B for anything I do. And matter of fact, I was talking to the patrons about this the other day, but the other day when I had to whip out the chainsaw to cut down those couple of small bushes and little oak trees and everything on the side of the house, I put on the chaps, totally forgot I left a tourniquet in that thigh pocket. Because if you have an accident with a chainsaw, it's usually a bad one.
Yeah, right.
And like, there is no, oh, I need a Band-Aid. It's like, oh no, I need a tourniquet and an operating theater right now. So I keep a tourniquet with the chainsaw stuff.
There was, speaking of tourniquets, when we did our Matter of Facts family camping trip, we had that we did that episode with our friends, and there was a conversation being had about how her kids, one of the guests on the show that day that was camping with us, keep tourniquets and things in their backpacks. That is just the unfortunately the life we live, and the life that our kids live now going to school is, there could be a school shooting. And so having those things available, like it's in my classroom, like it's in my bag, and kind of need to go over that before school starts again. But having that stuff really wherever you go, it's not a bad idea. If you're at a restaurant and it's in your car, good on you, like good deal. But it's kind of, you have to think about the way of the world. Like, we woke up this morning, it didn't happen here, but in New Orleans, of course, it's just, God, this hellhole that New Orleans is now. But the place that I used to work at Audubon was caught in gunfire that happened on the riverfront last night, and they just opened the doors 2 days ago. And it's like, you can't leave your house nowadays. You definitely can't go to New Orleans nowadays and feel safe. There's just so much stuff that happens in the world that you just have to consider. And don't you want to be prepared just in case? Y'all have a really good saying on Matter of Facts, you and Andrew, of what's your zombie. Yeah. And I'm really glad that y'all started saying that, because the zombie is not the zombie.
I have to give credit where it's due, though. It was
Uncle Randy.
Uncle Randy.
Yeah. But you have it on t-shirts, and you have it on mugs, and you have it all over the place. But what is your zombie is such a really good question to constantly think about, because everyone makes fun of preppers and survivalists, saying, what are you doing? You're preparing for the zombie apocalypse. And it's like, yeah, because maybe flesh decaying, brain eating, whatever, old humans aren't your zombie, which probably won't happen. I don't know, maybe it will, who knows. But what is your zombie? What is an instance or a scenario that could happen that will catch you up, and you're definitely don't want to be caught with your pants down, kind of thing. So,
and to that end, like what motivated me to start down this path was civil unrest. It was post Hurricane. It wasn't Hurricane Katrina specifically, because I've lived down here on the Gulf Coast, bless you, principally my entire life, except for a little bit of time, on military posts in Iraq. So I've lived on the Gulf Coast my whole life. Hurricanes are just part of life. You make peace with it really young, and you just learn to deal with it. But it was the societal breakdown after Hurricane Katrina that really got my gears turning, because when I was in Iraq, I had that experience of seeing what a truly broken country looked like. There's no emergency services, there is no 911, there is no FEMA, nobody's coming to save you, everybody's on your own, roving gangs of, and warlords running around doing whatever they wanted to do with pretty much impunity in certain parts of the country. And it was a really bad situation for the people that were unfortunately stuck in that place. But I was, in my 21-year-old brain, I was able to write it off and say, but this is Iraq. Like, this would never happen back in the United States. And then Katrina flattened the Gulf Coast, and I watched New Orleans turn into the third world. And that was when I had this moment of, like, shock, where I was like, I'm fortunate in the fact that most of my family was able to evacuate from this area. Like, my father was working for the power company. My mother and my younger brother were in Texas with family. You evacuated with us and eventually went to your family in North Louisiana. Like, everybody that I felt responsible for was out of the situation. Mm-hmm. But then I started having that thought of, what would I do if we couldn't? What would I do if the affected area wasn't New Orleans or wasn't the Gulf Coast? What if it was the state? What if it was 5 states? What if it was the whole country? What if? What if we can't get out of this situation? We have to learn to live with it. And that's what pushed me into becoming a survivalist. That's what started me questioning, what do I do if the water stops running? What do I do if the power goes out? What do I do if there's crazy people marched up and down the street taking shots through people's windows for fun, like just happened in New Orleans. And that some would say that obsession, but I like that slow descent into what ifism is what pushed me down this road. And the funny part of like becoming a survivalist or prepper or whatever, the funny part of dropping in this mindset and instituting it in your daily life is people from the outside think, well, you must be scared of everything because like you do all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, that's the funny part. I'm really not scared anymore. Because like if the power goes out, you know, I got a 5K out in the garage. I've got extension cords. I've got a jackery and I've got solar options. Like it's going to be hot and uncomfortable, but we're not going to die. We're going to figure it out. We're not going to lose the food investment we have. We've got ways to work that out. What happens if the water stops running? We've got plans for all that. So I guess that's the takeaway from being an everyday survivalist is that it removes the element of fear because you don't do it because you're motivated by fear. You do it because you're motivated by wanting to be able to respond to emergencies. And because you know you can respond to that emergency, there's no fear anymore.
Yeah. That's how I felt during Ida right before it hit. You know, you had blocks like down the street of people with, you know, trying to get gas in their cars and fill up their gas tanks to bring home and for their generators and things like that. And I can remember just kind of rolling past all the gas stations that we do on the way back to the house with Piper in the car going, you know, I'm just so glad that we don't have to sit there and do that and fight. And I mean, because it always breaks out into a fight, you know.
Yeah, well, there's always that person who's
or
filling
they
up.
run out of gas.
Well, but there's always that person that's filling up like 8 gas cans, and then there's a person behind them that gets that stupid idea in their head of, well, they don't need all that gas. I need gas.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just like, although our point of view, whenever we roll past that, and maybe this is a little mean-spirited, but I'm entitled to that a little bit, I think. But, like, my mean-spirited thought, intrusive thought is, like, you morons should have done this 2 days ago. Like, it's not the person filling up your vehicle. Because when there's a hurricane coming in, we fill up our vehicle, and then we usually make a point of every day we drive, we fill the vehicle up again, even if it's just a gallon, to make sure you stay topped off. And then the first time you see the line at the gas station, you're like, that's it. I've got all the gas I'm going to have. Because I'm not dealing with that crazy. But it's the people that are filling up 5 and 6 gas cans, and I'm like, you should have done this 3 days ago. Like, that gas wasn't going to spoil in a week, even without stabilizer. And you've waited to the absolute last second to do this. Because here you are the day before a hurricane comes in, there's a line 4 deep. You know, like, I don't know. I try not to get in my head about how ignorant I think people are when it comes to emergency preparedness, but dadgummit, they sure do make it challenging sometimes. When a snowstorm hits Michigan, it's nice when the only thing to worry about is whether or not I have enough whiskey and Coke. I honestly, now correct me if I'm wrong, but for Hurricane Ida, didn't you and Piper make like a last-minute store run for like chocolate and cookies and stuff like that?
We ate through our hurricane snacks really quick, and we had to go back out and get more hurricane snacks at the gas station. But
yeah, but when that's the worst emergency you have is dadgummit, I'm out of Oreos. You are like head, shoulders, knees, and toes above the rest of the population with regards to emergency preparedness.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think the worst emergency I had during Ida, other than the trees, because that was the situation, was when I went to make red beans and rice for like us and for the neighbors, and then I realized I was out of rice in the pantry. Don't ask me how
that was such a shocking event. It was like, how did this happen? And we had to go into long-term storage.
But that's the
pull
funny
the
part.
rice.
It's not like I didn't have 30 pounds of rice in the long-term storage I could loot from. That wasn't the issue. It was just, how did the bag of rice in the main pantry run down to zero, and neither one of us realized it? And then I went and looked in the second pantry, and I'm like, we're out here too. Mm-hmm. This is a prepper failure. How did I do this? But, you know, that's also why we layer things, so that it was going to be a long time before I didn't have the ability to make red beans and rice to keep the family fed.
Yeah.
So, important lessons for the kids, because, you know, this show is a lot about the family dynamic, and not just family, but relationships, and passing, like trying to spread this knowledge around. And I think that there's a lot of important lessons here for kids. Like a lot of it's stuff that you and I grew up with, because I know you've talked about how your family grew up dealing with like ice storms, because y'all were up in more northern Louisiana, and like you knew what you had to do to get through those, because the power would be out for a week, and you had to have food and water and all the same stuff we had to have down here for hurricanes. With the exception of down here, there becomes a point where you probably should evacuate to get out of the way of it, whereas an ice storm, it's like, how far do you have to go to get out of the reach of an ice storm when you're in rural Louisiana? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like it just hit your town. It hit like 6 zip codes.
Right. Yeah, there was the ice storm of '94 was the one that I can remember that was the worst. And in the comments, I can see Joe and Andrew talking about ice storms and snowstorms and things like that. And I know you're probably thinking like ice storms, Louisiana, that's kind of crazy. But in North Louisiana, it was really crazy. We had this storm come through, everything froze, and so trees are falling, branches are falling, houses are being hit, and it was just the most bizarre thing as a kid that I can think of. You've lost power, and so now we're all huddled in the living room in front of the fireplace, and I can remember Mama was boiling water so that we could take like a warm bath, and now they're from South Louisiana, my parents are, so one of the bathtubs was full, so we already had water in the bathtub, and then one of them was used for cleaning and bathing, and so Mama would fill up now she didn't stick us in boiling hot water, but she would.
That was only if they were bad.
She'd give us a warm bath, and because it was cold. And the good thing about the house I grew up in, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the houses in the town that I grew up in had natural gas, and so the fireplace was always going with natural gas, and we could turn on the burners in the kitchen to kind of heat the house a little bit more. Of course, you had your blankets and all that stuff, and it was just a really good. I had fun during the ice storms because, I mean, you could go outside and play in the ice, and my cousin lived down the street that had this amazing hill that was frozen over, and so, you had your trash can lids as sleds and all that stuff, and we were having a great time, and then we got to go home and actually spend time with family, and there was a lot of games and, trying to keep everyone entertained and things like that, and so... I mean, I look back on it, it was scary because you could hear the trees falling and cracking and the sounds that came from the ice storm, but it was a time that I can just remember like our family coming together and kind of having a good time. But I think my parents living through hurricane season down here, I want to say they lived through Hurricane Camille. Think they did. Anyway, that was the worst storm before Katrina that hit the Gulf.
Yeah.
And so, they just kind of knew the lay of the land and how to do a couple of things for that. And at that moment, in '94, I was in fourth grade. I wasn't thinking, oh, my parents are survivalists, they're preppers or whatever. My dad had a greenhouse with all sorts of yummy plants in there and things like that. And so we did have food in the pantry, and you couldn't drive anywhere because the roads were just ice, but yeah.
And I guess that's kind of where I was wanting to pull from, was like a lot of what you're describing, like these lessons you learned vicariously through your parents about how to deal with emergency situations are very similar to I see Andrew, are very similar to the lessons that I took away from my parents dealing with hurricanes. Like I specifically remember having to hearing discussions, not that I was part of them except that I was there, but I remember these discussions about, hey, there's a hurricane in the Gulf, it's hurricane season, we need to make sure we have bread and peanut butter, and don't ask why peanut butter was the go-to, but I was a peanut butter kid. I'd eat peanut butter sandwiches 8 days a week.
You're still a peanut butter kid.
Yes. But we knew that we needed non-perishable goods because if a hurricane hit, the power was going to be out. Everything in the fridge was going to get either cooked or thrown out. And I remember. Do you remember Hurricane Ike when Piper was like little bitty? Like the day after, and it was kind of the same way after Ida, but like the day after a hurricane when the power's out, I go on this spree of everything in the fridge is getting cooked. Like we're making all the eggs, we're making all the sausage, anything in the fridge is going to be bad within 5 to 8 hours. Because like I don't want to move it from the fridge to the freezer and then add more heat load to the freezer. I want that to stay cold as long as possible. So we go on the spree and have this big old breakfast and cook everything. Like I remember these discussions about how eat the neighbor's yapping dogs first. I don't want to say anything because statute of limitations won't run out before that becomes necessary. But anyway, like I remember all these discussions about having hurricane food and having hurricane preps and having extra water. I remember all these conversations, and I just like I absorbed it because it was something my parents did to get ready for hurricanes, and I hope that our daughter is absorbing some of the same lessons from us about having extra food and having a large pantry and having extra water on hand and having, I mean, what the hell, that's a power bank sitting right there running the lights for this podcast. And there's several more of those in the house for various things. Like I feel like there's so much of what we purchased over the years as camping gear is also for, emergency situations, for power outages. Mm-hmm. So, like, I guess my hope is that by us having these conversations with our children or introducing them to these concepts and to this gear and to this way of thinking early, that, hey, what would you do if that happened?
Yeah.
Because, like, we do that. I do it with Piper all the time. I call it, in the self-defense community, we refer to it as wargaming, where it's like, this is a scenario, how would you deal with it? And the point is to make you think and develop a plan on the spot to respond to an emergency so that if the emergency comes up, you've already thought about it. Like you've started to do some of the mental legwork ahead of times. And I do that with Piper regularly. We talk about, like me and her were at Rouse's the other day at the local grocery store. And I was going to put the buggy back up close to the store because I hate leaving them in the daggum parking lots. It irks me. And Piper was sitting in the truck. I fired the truck up, turned the air conditioning on, and then I very quickly told Piper, I'm like, hey, you know how you can lock yourself in here from the back seat? And I showed her on the back of the passenger seat of my truck, there's a little lever you can pull that folds that front seat flat so she can reach over it and hit the lock-unlock button. So I showed her how to lock herself into the truck. And when I came back, she reached over, unlocked it, pulled the seat back up, let me back into the truck. But then we had the conversation on the way home of, what would you have done if somebody was trying to get into the truck while I was pushing the buggy back up to the store? And it wasn't in a scary context or it wasn't anything designed to worry her, but it was just, what would you do? Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, I'm not letting him in. I'm like, that's good. That's step one. Don't let him in. Don't unlock the doors. I don't care who it is. Like, you can see your father right over there bringing the buggy up to the front of the store. You know, if you just sit in that truck long enough, I'm going to come back and want to know who the hell this is talking to my kid. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what would you do if they started pulling on the door handle? She said, I don't know. And I'm like, you lay on the horn. I'm like, if a young girl is sitting in a vehicle laying on the horn while somebody else is trying to yank the door open, somebody is going to take notice of that and want to know what the hell is going on. And not only that, the minute I hear the horn for a Toyota Tacoma blaring, you're going to have a very large, angry father charging across the parking lot.
Yeah, so most people are going to hear a horn, and like we heard a horn yesterday, she was getting her hair cut, and it was somebody's car alarm going off, just she hit the button or whatever. Well, everybody is like, is that my car? Is that my car? And so, yeah, the horn is definitely the thing to do.
Yeah. And Joe was saying scream super loud, which I didn't embrace that solution initially because, like, she's inside of a car. Is everybody outside the car going to be able to hear her? But I have told her, if you're ever at a grocery store and, like, you lose me and your mom. In other words, you can't see us. You don't know where we turn left, you turn right, something happened. I've always told her, I'm like, the very first thing you do is stop where you are and start hollering Mom, Dad.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, because we know what our daughter sounds like. And any other adult within a reasonable radius is going to want to know, why is this child yelling for mom and dad?
Yeah.
So it's these little instances of like teaching her to think about emergency situations ahead of time and develop plans for them, and then we can talk about the merits of that plan and tell her, I think this would work better, I think that would work better. But it now means that we've at least implanted into her mind the idea that emergencies do happen. Bad things do happen. And at the moment of contact, you have the ability to take positive steps for your well-being or negative steps. And sometimes doing nothing is a negative step. Sometimes doing nothing is a positive step. Mm-hmm. But that's why I would try to, Joe is saying parent mode kicks in on anyone with half of a set of morals. I would like to believe that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's the important lessons for kids, is like you talk to them about the things you're doing, the things you're seeing, you involve them. Get their head up out of their iPad every now and then and get them to try to get them to look at the world the way you do.
Yeah.
As a person who's interested in in your survival and theirs, because like to quote Clint Smith from Thunder Ranch, who's a very prolific firearms instructor, but he said that since children are an extension of your genetic line, you should probably look after them. Like, if for no other reason, the fact that
yeah,
you should want to take care of them. But he also makes the point of teaching your kids how to use a fire extinguisher. Because he's like, because now you've just taught them how to save their life and maybe yours.
Yeah.
So like that's why I think teaching kids this lifestyle is only a positive. Like, they don't have to be the crazy prepper that lives in a cabin in the woods and eats MREs 4 meals a day, and they don't have to be that. All they have to be is a person who looks at the world around them as having the potential for causing them harm and wanting to take steps to insulate them from that.
And it doesn't have to be scary. So like first I want to say, always incorporate your kids into the lifestyle. Don't exclude them just because they're kids. Maybe they're super young, and I know we've had people message us on Facebook or wherever they've messaged us, and I've gotten a lot of questions of, how can I get my 3-year-old in on the prepping lifestyle? How can I get my 7-year-old?
We started ours at about 3, 4.
Yeah, well, and there are so many things, and maybe I think about it differently because I'm a teacher, or just because I'm a mom. I mean, there's a lot of holes that I fill in for Phil, and Phil fills in for me. So like, I bring something different to the table than Phil does, but Piper brings something different to the table for us too. And a lot of times we ask her, if this happened, or if, whatever, you give her a what if, and listen to how they respond. The other day she was looking at different card games to play and things like that. And that's just, kids aren't going to, I would say 99% of kids are not going to go to the scary end of the world, scenario. They're going to go to, well, if I don't have TV, well, then how am I going to be entertained? And so that's something that we have prepped for. We have games, and you were talking about in long-term storage, you have all the things you need for baking. And so that was something that I told you, was like, yeah, beans and rice are great, but what's going to happen when the two of us are on our period and we really need chocolate? Or what's going to happen if things outside are just so bad that you need the comfort of comfort food, and of being, really just comfort food, because I keep thinking of like your baking supplies and long-term storage. And so you're like, yeah, that's something that we hadn't thought about. But you have to think of the kids, especially if you have kids in your family dynamic, of what's going to make this less of a crappy situation for everyone. What's going to keep morale high? What's going to, as high as you can anyway, what's going to keep morale high? And so that's one way in the last few years that we've changed our prepping lifestyle, and we started to include Piper more into it. But one, that's something that we think about as far as like what we're going to prep. But when we're at the grocery store, and things that I've told the people who have messaged us on how to get their kids incorporated into it is, play a color game at the grocery store. Tell them you're going to go pick out 3 cans of yellow corn and 4 cans of green beans, and you need orange carrots as well. And so not only are you helping with their math skills, their color skills, but they're prepping with you. And so they now are going to look forward to going to the grocery store with you. And you can talk about where your food comes from. Does it come from the grocery store? No. You get it at the grocery store, but you can start to incorporate them into those little things.
You can also, comment. I now see Phil making emergency Hershey bar scavenging runs. So, no, I actually have like an enormous bulk bag of chocolate chips, and I literally have one bucket that's just labeled baking. And it's, off the top of my head, flour, cornmeal, sugar, brown sugar, chocolate chips, cocoa, baking powder, salt. It's everything I could think of that...
to keep the zombies at bay.
No, well, but in all seriousness, it's everything I need except for like milk. And I do have powdered milk in the stores. I would use that if it was an emergency. But it's one of those things of like, I know that because I'm a baker, just something I fell into a long time ago, but like...
This is the baker.
Yes, I'm the baker. The guy with the enormous beard and the crazy prepper is also the one that makes like cookies.
The best chocolate chip
cookies and brownies. And
Anyway, keep going.
Anyway, so like I know that if I have those basic supplies, I don't need the box off the shelf that's for making cookies or for making brownies or whatever. It's like, no, I have all the stuff I need. I have all the recipes. I have all the stuff. I can make whatever I want to make. And, there has been more than one occasion where my wife has said, if you want to live to see tomorrow, I think I really need brownies. And I go get my butt in that kitchen and there will be brownies in about an hour, babe. So, it's a thing.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about like including different members of the family and how that ends up being a one hand wash the other type of situation where one thinks of something the other doesn't. But I think this is like the last thing to talk about in the guise of a family of survivalists is how to handle doing it by yourself. And this has 2 aspects. First of all is what happens if you're the only one in your family that thinks about this kind of stuff.
And we know people that are like that.
Yeah. But it's also what happens if you're the only one that does this one thing. Like we've talked before about the fact that like you haven't made that jump to getting your concealed carry permit carrying a firearm in public. So I know that's on me. I know that I have to grab my gun. I have to holster up every time we go out because that's on me. That's something you don't do and Piper can't do yet. And that's on me. I have to do that. And as an extension of that, I have to make sure that my firearms are operational. I have to make sure they're cleaned. I have to handle ammunition. I have to handle the training. Everything in that vein is mine. It's something I have to do. And even though like you're hell on wheels with a deer rifle, you just don't train often enough to be at what I think is the appropriate level to be the person responsible for, the gun stuff. Mm-hmm. So I know that's on me. And then there are things that I would like to think aren't on you because I'm not willing to do them, but because I'm just a man and I don't think about those things. Like you're the one that brought up years ago the baking supplies and comfort food and feminine products and all this stuff I'm a moron about because I'm a guy. I don't think about feminine products. I'm like, what do you need those for? Oh. So it's one of those things where like I wanted to have that discussion about both sides of this equation, whichever one you want to tackle first, because I know there's people who are saying I am 100% responsible for 100% of the prepping, but even in the family of survivalists, there are things that you are going to be individually responsible for because that is either you're the only one that will do it or the only one that knows how. Yeah. Or even just the person who is the best suited for it. Like in between the two of us, if we look at firearms as that one thing, like I have more experience than you do. It's not that you couldn't rise to the level of experience I have, but the time investment to shore up that gap, would it be better spent making 2 shooters in the house or you doing something I don't do?
Yeah.
That you're better at already.
Yeah. I totally agree that I really do hate the fact that I do not have my concealed carry. And who knows, maybe in the next few months, the government over in Baton Rouge will decide to make that
Constitutional carry.
constitutional carry
not
pass.
holding my breath.
Well, maybe, fingers crossed, you never know. But anyway, yeah, I think it's important to focus on what each person can bring to the table, because I mean, as a family unit, you're all going to be better at something that the other person is not. And so, do I hate that we rely on you solely for gunpowder and things like that? Yeah, it kind of makes me feel a little guilty that I'm not helping you carry that load, but it's not something that I totally feel 100% comfortable with. Like, I know I need to be at the range more. I should have gone to the range with you yesterday to get some practice in, and I need to be better about that. But I'm also better in other fields of our prepping lifestyle that you're not. And, I feel like I bring in more of the emotional aspect of our lifestyle. And that is just as important in my eyes as it is for you to make sure that you have a gun on your hip at all times, And I have to go back into my thoughts and say, I'm just as important in this as you are, even though you have the ability to protect the family a little bit better than I do.
It's not a question of like more important, but it's an issue of just different focus. And I have happily admitted that when you brought to my attention the shortfalls in the prepping plan I had kind of come up with on my own, because you weren't totally bought in at that time, there were these massive glaring holes. And it wasn't stuff that, like, I thought to myself, well, I just love having a miserable spouse and daughter. It was just stuff I didn't think of, because it wasn't my focus. My focus, probably owing to a lot of my military experience, but it's very focused on like food. If I have rice and beans, that's good. Food is covered. I don't need baking supplies. I don't need chocolate. I don't need any of that nonsense. Because to me, it was about food is food. Food is done. Move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And then it was, like with, with a lot of things. Like I think I was a little bit better rounded about medical equipment, because like I had that experience of like sometimes your medical equipment means I need a blowout kit, sometimes it means I need Band-Aids and Tylenol, like but there were these holes of things I didn't think about because they're not my area of expertise and it's not my area of experience. And then when you pointed out, hey, you missed these things, I was like, oh, those are things.
Those are things.
So like I guess that's why I would say, like, in this guise of like there's certain things you're going to have to handle alone. Some of that's not even by intent. It's just the fact that like everybody has a different perspective, and if your perspective, like my perspective, lends itself to to more of the home defense and the self-protection end of this, it's purely because I have so much more experience in that realm than I do in comfort food, because the Army's not really big on comfort. The Army's really big on sustainment,
Just
and
survival.
Yeah. And at the same time, that's also where like our back and forth really helps out, because we know that when we've been in really bad situations like that, and it's been like worst case scenario, I've been the one that's kind of stood up and said, we have this, and this. It's not going to be fun, but we're covered. And then if it hasn't been as bad of a situation, you've been the one that said, we can do this, and this, and we can have some fun and not make this as miserable as it's going to be. So, like, I would say that for the family the whole family is bought in survivalism, but there are certain things you alone are going to be responsible for, because it's your perspective, your experience, your emotional proclivities. I mean, it's the most misogynistic thing in today's time, but I firmly believe that men and women are just psychologically wired differently.
You misogynist.
I'm okay with that, but I'm just saying, like, I think on the averages, men and women are just psychologically wired differently, and in instances where I feel like there are times when the natural functions of your personality leads you in one direction. My personality leads me in a very different direction, and rather than like grapple over that, I see it as that's an opportunity for the two of us to have a better rounded plan, because you go this way and I go this way and we cover everything in the middle. As opposed to, you dumb woman, you need to do this my way, or you dumb man, you need to do everything my way. It's like, no, we need to do it everything both ways.
Yeah.
But we also need to acknowledge the fact that because of us being different people, we just see everything differently. And that's an opportunity to make a better plan, in my opinion.
I mean, you could totally go down the rabbit hole here of all sorts of things. And like Joe says, man, just survive. Woman, survive in comfort. Man, what's that? Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a bunch of rabbit holes you could totally go down, the emotional aspect of a woman's brain and you're back on that comment about
I missed it earlier.
No, you already put that one up. But I definitely think it's, well, I'm trying to think, like, because I've never done this by myself, so like I've never been a prepper by myself. But I keep thinking like your banner says how to handle it doing it by yourself, and you're thinking of doing it by yourself in a family unit.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that there's multiple aspects to that statement. Because yes, there is if we need feminine products, I'm going to depend on you to point that out to me. Because
right.
Sorry. But then there are the people who are either by themselves, single, and have to do prepping all by themselves, and that's a blessing and a curse, because there's no one else to bargain with, there's nobody else to plan for, there's nobody else to argue with. You just take care of you. And that, in some ways, that's simpler. And in some ways, that's a lot harder.
And see, I think it could be a lot harder when you're the only one in the family doing the prepping. And
that is the hardest part.
Trying to get your spouse or your significant other to buy into it is really hard. And that's something that friends of ours have had trouble with is, they're the sole prepper survivalist, and they're trying to prep for their whole family, and the one person that they should be able to rely on for support and doing these things, they're not there. They're not sitting at the table with them. And so now that person has an even bigger burden on their shoulders, because they're doing it. I always say that people who are survivalists and preppers and have a family are doing it because they love their family. And they're doing it because they want to make sure that their family is taken care of and provided for. And I don't ever think that a prepper or a survivalist does it out of any sort of negative emotion or whatever. This is, I totally believe that a prepper, a survivalist, is someone who has deep concern and care for themselves, their family, and others. Don't come looking for guns and stuff like that if shit hits the fan at our house. But when Ida hit, we did help take care of our neighbors, and we did provide and anything that we had excess in to our neighbors.
What we were able to.
But I just think it's harder for someone who is the only one in the lifestyle in the family. And like I kept saying rabbit holes earlier, I think that we could have a whole episode on that. And but kind of rounding this out a little bit, being married to a crazy prepper is not the craziest thing that I've done. It's not the craziest thing that we've done as a couple before. And once I kind of got over that hurdle of what the hell are you doing, it just became such a second nature to us. And it wasn't a shocker, and it was more of a, my God, my husband really loves us and really cares. And this is something that he's dedicated his life to, making sure it's just like having the gun on your hip when we go out. It's just like making sure that the bills are paid, or there's gas in the tank, or, it's making sure that my tires look okay. Those are all the things that you do as a husband and a father to ensure that we're safe, we're comfortable, and we're well cared for. And this is just such an extension, and a heartfelt extension of that. And it's just, it was something that I couldn't argue with, because it was just like, well, duh, yeah, shouldn't all people be doing this? And why don't more people do this? And especially, why don't more people prep in, you get in the South, and we get all of those starting at the end of May. Hurricane season's a week away. What have you done to plan? Here's what you need to plan, blah, blah, blah. Nobody listens to that. I don't say nobody, but a lot of people just don't care to listen to that anymore. They're not going through their pantry to make sure that they have everything that they need. And that's just something that I'm very grateful for, that you kind of did take the leap and you bought the plate carrier and and all that stuff.
Yeah, but on the inverse of it, like, I think what's missing from not just a lot of survivalist couples, but a lot of marriages across the board, not even just marriages, but a lot of relationships, is trust and support.
Yeah.
Because, like, the one thing that made this an easy leap for you was that you trusted and you supported me. Mm-hmm. If I believed it was important enough to not just money, and money at the time, like, we started prepping, money was tight. Money was really tight. And in spite of money being tight, in spite of, basically, like, working a full-time job and doing side work to try to make extra money and trying to help take care of you and Piper by helping out with the housework, like, my money and my time was already had such a high demand placed on it. I was still willing to invest time, the little bit of time and money I had left that I could have spent with my feet up or relaxing or taking a nap. I decided to invest in this thing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's when you were like, okay, if he feels like it's this important, that the 5 minutes he has between, like, burping his daughter after a meal and moving on to the next chore, he's doing this with it, it's got to be important enough for me as his spouse to support him in, to any degree you were able. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of relationships and a lot of survivalist couples, is if there's one spouse that's pulling the other into this lifestyle, the other spouse, I feel like, has an obligation to trust and support that spouse within reasonable boundaries, to have an honest discussion about what do you believe we should be doing that we're not, to better care for this family. And it's not just buying cases of MREs, like you said. It's checking the tires on your Jeep and make sure the oil changes get done. And it's, like, making extra payments on the house and paying down our debt, doing all the financial planning. Like, all these, no one of these things to me is not prepping. It's all preparedness. It's all planning ahead for tomorrow. It's different veins and different aspects, and some people would argue, well, that's not survivalism. And I'm like, financial survivalism is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's all, I'm 40, you're 39. We were talking about this the other day, how much of our generation is eyeball deep in debt, has a mile of student debt on their back, cannot purchase a home, cannot get credit, and doesn't have $500 in the bank in case of an emergency. Like, it is depressing, and it makes me want to cry for those people, but it also reminds me, like, all the work we did to get here, and we did put off till tomorrow, and we did plan ahead for tomorrow. We did do the hard work yesterday so that we could profit tomorrow, and that is preparedness. That is preparedness all the way through, whether it is a conscious decision to use Pell Grants in a student job or work full-time to get through college with no student debt, or whether it was a conscious decision to save money so that we would be in a well position to buy our first house. Like, we made all these decisions along the way to say, I want better tomorrow, so I have to abstain from immediate gratification today. And I feel like if the burgeoning prepper in the family can explain it that way to the rest of their family, I feel like more spouses would trust that member and kind of follow along and say, I think if we want to have this result in the event of this emergency, we have to do this today.
Yeah.
And now you might have to bargain over what emergency you think is most likely to happen. And I think you should prepare for, like, hurricanes and tornadoes way ahead of zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
But those are my thoughts. Like, to close that thought out of what happens, how to do this by yourself. if you are the only one and no one else will help, I hate to say it this way, you have to suck it up and just take care of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like me with concealed carrying. I'm the only one. There's no point complaining about it. There's no point whining about it. There's no point. Just suck it up and do it. Because if carrying that burden for my family means my family is better positioned in the event of an emergency, I am okay bearing that load. And if you are the only person in your family that is of this mindset, then you have to be the person to say, hey, let's buy an extra can of green beans. Hey, let's buy an extra one of these. Don't even say, oh, prepper this, prepper that, doomsday prepper this, zombies that. Don't even say that. Just, hey, we should buy 2 of those.
Yeah.
And if your spouse pushes back, just say, well, it's not like it's going to spoil.
Yeah.
Let's just get an extra one so that we have it and be done with it. So we don't have to run back to the grocery store midweek or whatever excuse it takes. Like, if you are the only one, just take ownership of it and do it. I mean, this is we're talking about taking care of your family. And if the goal is to take care of your family, it's not to do crazy stuff on Instagram for clicks and likes and clout. But if the goal is to take care of your family, it's a burden you'll carry. You should.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Marriage is another word for team. You take a vow and sign some papers. Family is just a bigger team.
I think that's a really good comment to end the episode on. Way to go, Joe.
Yeah. So I thought this would make for an interesting conversation. Like I said, we have talked about this on Matter of Facts several times. We'll debate over how many times, but several times. But we haven't talked about it raising values. We haven't talked about it and I feel like this tone and this format. And I mean, to me, a lot of things we've talked about have been kind of armoring the family unit against those less physical harms. You know what I'm saying? We've talked a lot about how to prevent families from breaking down and breaking up. And I feel like a conversation about how to guard your family against physical harm is worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But
okay,
I guess we'll cap this off. Thank you all for joining us on a Sunday morning, and you can tune in to us on YouTube and Rumble and Facebook every Sunday, unless we have to change the date and time, which happens occasionally. And if you're listening to this in audio form and you would like to see my wife's lovely face and my ugly mug, you can check us out on any of the streaming platforms.
Oh, Lord have mercy. All right, someone come get this guy. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
I'm never ready on the button for the outro.
You got to end the broadcast first, there.
No.